So, in the course of this retreat, we have talked about the three primary aspects of the alchemical process, which correspond to the three primary cosmic rays, which are namely the first ray of divine will, the second ray of love and wisdom, the third ray of spiritual intelligence. And correspondingly, the three aspects of the alchemical process are the correct use of will, which is the path to enlightenment, which is about using the divine will within you, which has got nothing to do with the mind, to apply a certain amount of pressure to shed away layers of fear and illusion and reveal the source that is present within all. The second path being the path to union with source, or the path to oneness, about the correct use of love, which is about that constant expansion into an experience of unity with source in all things. And real keys to that are the practice of the holy encounter, that recognition of source within all things, and also the practice of gratitude in recognizing the benevolence of this universe. And the third aspect being the path to knowing, which is that path to expansion into the mind of God, however we call it, is that sense of the correct use of intelligence in order to expand your knowing and your understanding, your spiritual understanding of how the universe works and how life works and what are the laws of this universe, in order to use that in selfless service and humility. So it needs to be approached in the spirit of humility and selfless service. And today, I'd really like to relate this with the various states of consciousness and the various levels of consciousness. Now, anyone who's been studying with us for a while knows that as you go through the various initiations in the process, you will expand your consciousness so that your reality is experienced differently. And certain initiations correspond with certain states of consciousness, and the more you grow, the more your level of consciousness is of a higher vibration and of a more expansive nature. Now, fourth dimensional consciousness is about flow. Well, first of all, third dimensional consciousness, which is basically being identified with ego, is living your life in a third dimensional way, which is really about me, me, me. It's completely self-centered. You basically are the center of your little world, and everything that you perceive and do and the way you spend your energy, it's about trying to have your needs met and try to be happy or try to avoid certain things in your life. Fourth dimensional consciousness is the experience of flow. Now, what that means is that you begin to experience a certain timelessness. That's why we begin to have that experience of timelessness. It's by no way the full experience of that, but we begin to experience that. And we start to really have more ability to experience empathy with others and with all of life. Fifth dimensional consciousness is the experience of oneness. So this is really where we start to experience a certain amount of oneness with all life, and that empathic rapport becomes much deeper, and we really have that sense of being one with everyone involved in a particular situation or all of life that we encounter. And then sixth dimensional consciousness is the experience of isness, which is really about that sense of oneness and unity with all of life, but also that experience of complete absence of judgment. So when you have that oneness and that complete absence of judgment, what it brings you to is start to have the experience of true compassion. And that true compassion is a bit of a doorway, a bit of a particular stage in the evolution of consciousness, which starts to take you then into the 6th, 7th, and 8th dimensional consciousnesses, being the experience of flow, oneness, and isness more on a universal level. So really the fourth dimensional consciousness of the experience of flow that we were talking about, that's really the experience on a planetary level. Fifth dimensional consciousness as oneness is that experience on a planetary level. Then you go through that kind of transition of the sixth dimensional consciousness, which is the experience of isness on a planetary level, but it also starts to take you into the experience of flow within the context of the universal mind, the universal being. And then 7/8 of the experience of oneness and isness on the universal level. And these experiences of experiencing that flow, experiencing that oneness, experiencing that isness, and so on and so forth, need to really be your experience on the ground as a human being in all moments. And if you don't have that, it means that you are not actually grounding and anchoring the initiations and the level of consciousness attached with these initiations that you are working on and that you have supposedly achieved and actualized. And the experience of higher levels of consciousness has a lot to do with that first aspect, which is that divine will, the correct use of will, and that path of enlightenment. You know, that expansion of consciousness and experiencing reality from a more enlightened perspective has a lot to do with that first aspect, the path of enlightenment. It is a process of enlightenment. So if you are not actually experiencing these levels of consciousness as part of your daily experience on the ground for whatever level of initiation you're at, then you're basically not applying the first principle. There's also aspects of the second and third principle, and we'll go into a bit more exploration about that in a little while. But the first principle, that correct use of will, the application of divine will, is the real key for all of that, for bringing that sense of enlightenment of your consciousness. And if you are not doing that, you're basically being weak-willed. You're letting yourself be banged around by your feelings, your emotions, your fear, your selfishness, and allowing your perspective to shrink and to lower in vibration, so that you are basically not behaving and being as an enlightened soul, not to the level that you actually are. So we have 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th dimensional consciousness. And then 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th is really starts to move into that co-creator. It has to do with that co-creator status and that experience of being co-creation, in co-creation with spirit. And really, as you keep expanding with that experience of true compassion and the elements of the co-creator status, you start to really have deeper aspects of direct knowing and really embodying that knowing. And that starts really in that kind of universal level, the 6th, 7th, 8th. That's where you experience that true compassion for the first time, and you start to grow with that and start to really be able to access the knowing more. And then as you expand into the co-creator levels, then you start to really have a lot more of an experience of that, the oneness, and that the ability to perceive source in all things, but also that complete non-judgment and that really true compassion and that oneness with the knowing in itself. And it's not a mental understanding, it's really just being one with the knowing, and that's something you expand into in that way. Now, everyone here has put their hands up to basically train for leadership. And the goal for everyone here is really about reaching those levels of co-creator status and the level of consciousness for co-creator. And that's really the goal for most here. And the experience of co-creator is really about realizing the oneness with all of life on a planetary level, and then on in more expanded spheres, in such a way that you are fully and completely aware in the moment, in every moment, of how your energy individually, but as well as part of the collective, your energy being part of that collective, is affecting the outcomes of things, the events of life. Things happen, how things evolve on a planetary level and on other expanded spheres. You continue to grow and expand in that way. And an easy way to kind of know if you are in that co-creator level of consciousness is to, let's feel into something that's happened on the planet in the last 6 to 12 months. And we could take the example of, something quite big and quite, I wouldn't say tragic, but, not necessarily a happy, joyful event. But if we take an example, for instance, that whole situation with Iran and Israel and Palestine, that whole region there, and if you just feel into that situation and you get instantly, without having to try hard or feel into it for a long time, you get instantly a knowing, a sense of knowing of how you individually as well as collectively contributed to that situation happening on the planet. If you don't have that instant knowing and that instant sense of it, that you're not in that level of consciousness, of the co-creator level consciousness. And that's what we need to aim for. Now, when you do that same exercise of feeling into those events on the planet, from a six-dimensional consciousness perspective, if you feel into those events and you really get a sense of, well, oneness, first of all, like this is actually happening inside of you, but also that complete absence of judgment and that complete sense of why things are happening the way that they are happening over there, then you are in six-dimensional consciousness. Fifth-dimensional consciousness, if you do that same exercise, will give you also that sense of oneness, like it's happening, kind of happening in you because of the oneness component. And the experience on six-dimensional consciousness, when you feel into that, and you're in isness and you have that complete non-judgment, you really easily get a sense straight away of how you can contribute to that situation in order to produce an outcome of more harmony or more unconditional love. When you're in fifth-dimensional consciousness, even though you have that oneness component, the experience of how you can help with that situation tends to be a bit more of a transition between the human and the spirit, where you're a little bit more torn, where, on the human level, in a completely selfless way, in terms of coming from selfless motivations and really wanting to help and to serve as a human being, you tend to have a sense of what you could do or what you'd like to do to help that situation. And then at the same time, you're having that experience of, as a spiritual being, what you could do and would like to do, or what feels right to do to assist harmony in that situation. And often these two aspects are quite hard to reconcile, because the human and the spirit have very different perspectives and experiences of events on planet Earth. And then if you feel into it and shine the light of fourth-dimensional consciousness, experience of flow into it, you'll get a lot more of that sense of empathy for what's happening over there, and really empathically able to relate with what's happening. So that just kind of gives you a bit of an idea of what reality you tend to come from. So if we look at fourth-dimensional consciousness, the experience of flow, obviously we've talked about the importance of that first principle of correct use of will, and how to marshal that will in a way that enlightens your consciousness, so that you start to experience that sense of timelessness and that sense of flow and that sense of being in empathy with all of life around you, all of life involved in a particular situation. We can also see how, with that level of consciousness, there's a certain aspect of the third principle, the correct use of intelligence, and that sense of understanding how things work. And often the fourth dimensional consciousness, when you shine that within a particular situation, and that's a perspective from which you are coming from, you actually start to get that understanding of cause and consequence. It's a very kind of early stages of having that experience of understanding cause and consequence, but you're starting to really have that ability to see why things are happening the way they are in the early stages of that. And so that third aspect of the process, that correct use of intelligence, is also quite important in starting to really discern how the laws of the universe work in order to cause that chain of cause and consequence, and why things happen the way they do. And obviously to start to experience that timelessness, there is a certain aspect of the second principle, the correct use of love, that union with source. But it's not the prevalent one for that particular one, but it needs to be a certain amount of allowing yourself to come into oneness with the experience of linear time, so that you start to have a bit of a taste of that timelessness. Fifth dimensional consciousness, once again, that first principle of shining the cold light of truth, the cold light of God into the situation will help you reveal that it is the oneness of all, and that's why that first principle is so important in bringing enlightenment to your consciousness, for you to keep really enlighten your perspective and raise your level of consciousness, because what that first principle does is start to really reveal the source reality that's hiding behind the veils of glamour, illusion, and Maya within all things. And that growth through the various stages of consciousness is really about shedding away illusions, glamours, and Maya that you get caught up with when you're coming from a third dimensional perspective, for instance, which is all that whole being centered around the little self. It's all about me, and how can I get my needs met. And so in that oneness, fifth dimensional perspective, the second principle comes in a lot stronger, where it's really you have to allow yourself to work with the principle of love and with the second ray to really expand into more oneness and that experience of unity with all of life. And that can be on that planetary level, or it can be just in any situation in your life. It's like if you are having an experience where you're having conflicts, whether it's at work or in your relationship, and you are able to have that empathy for everyone involved and have that sense of understanding why things are happening the way they are, and so on, then you're approaching it from that sense of flow. But if you're really starting to experience it all as a sense of oneness, that there is really that sense of you and I, we're the same, we're all part of the same life having this experience, then you're coming from that fifth dimensional consciousness. If you're coming from that isness, that sixth dimensional consciousness, you'll have that sense of empathy, but it goes beyond empathy because it's a real oneness, like it's all happening as part of you, as part of your greater being and your greater energy. And you can, have a sense of what everyone's going through, but there's that complete absence of judgment. And then that sense of compassion, where you understand why everyone's being the way that they are and why you're having this experience and why you are in this situation to start with. And it doesn't mean that you don't make a decision to try to take the situation in the most ethical, highest love outcome, and act in a way which will foster the most harmony into the situation. But you're really coming from a place of fully understanding, in bringing that true compassion and having absolutely no judgment, and being able to feel as one with everyone and everything involved. And then if you really go into the co-creator levels, you just instantly know, and it's not about the little ego, what did my little ego say or do that contributed to the situation, although that's part of it. If we're taking the example of a situation such as conflict at work or conflict in a relationship. But it's really more about over a certain stretch of time, that sense of the use of my energy contributed more love, more fear, was the cause of this happening and that then roll-balled into this and that. And so you get the sense of how you individually contributed to this outcome, because nothing happens at random, we all know that. And you also get a sense of how you and everyone else involved collectively contributed to that outcome. And because you have that sense of oneness with all involved, it's not like, oh, I did that and you did that and you did that and you did that. It's real collective oneness things, like all of our energies together as one contributed to this situation, because that's how it moved and that's how it was expressed, and this is the choices to express that energy that were made. And really, as you keep expanding through that sense of co-creator consciousness, more and more you really get that sense about how you, as an individual aspect of source, the one as one, yet as one with the bigger one, the one as one as many, many as one, all of that, many as many, how you are just an extension of that source that's expressing its energy in a way that co-creates certain outcomes in collaboration with all these other aspects of the source, which is the same source, but it's still different expressions of that source. And it's just really becomes this dance of being aware of yourself as an individual aspect of source, and using your energy in a way that either creates more love or more fear, or expresses in a way that will tend to move energy in a collective way or on a planetary level into certain directions. But that sense also of how other units of consciousness are doing the same, and it just becomes this dance. And And when you feel into a particular situation, you're just aware of the part that you played in that dance. Another metaphor I could use would be the metaphor of cooking. You know, if you're making a soup and you're chopping all your veggies in little bits, and you have potato and celery and carrot and whatever, broccoli or something, and you know, you're one of the pieces of broccoli, let's say, and so you're aware of yourself as that unique piece of broccoli that's contributing its flavor to the overall soup, but you're also aware of yourself as the whole soup and how that all moves together, and how that little piece of broccoli is actually contributing its own flavor, but at the same time you're really understanding how that blends with all the other flavors in order to create the final product, which is that particular soup. And so sometimes when you get really trapped into your egoic issues and feelings and patterns, and you're just struggling with really overcoming a particular attachment or a particular conflict in a situation, often it is because you're coming from a three-dimensional perspective. You're being weak-willed, and you're not shining the light of enlightenment into the situation and not allowing yourself to raise your level of consciousness enough that you can really perceive more of the truth of source reality of this situation, and you're seeing everything through that limited level of consciousness and that limited perspective, where, you know, it's all about this little self-centered reality where it's all about me, 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 and in that there's enormous amount of struggle, and there is no flow, there is no oneness, there is no isness, there is lots of judgment, there is lots of push and pull in that reality. And so another really useful tool to use in those situations where you really struggle to expand beyond that little three-dimensional consciousness would be to start using these three principles, shining that principle of the correct use of will and that divine will, and really in a way to kind of start bringing that enlightenment into your consciousness, and then using either the surrendering to that union of oneness or some of the third principle of intelligence to then start to attune yourself to that higher level of consciousness and reality. And you know, that's something many forget here, that you start to get triggered into something, and instantly you start to just drop your level of consciousness, and all your perceptions get really warped, and you're just coming from the wrong perspective. But you know, we are very attached to that. When we're caught up in that, we're very attached to that reality, and when you get stuck in that third dimensional reality, it is all about me. So whatever me doesn't want or doesn't like or suffers about or has issues with, it is going to be a big drama, and it is going to be something that you can't overcome because you can't even see beyond the scope of that. So when we align and we center and we come back to this spirit identification, to some degree, that's what we're doing, is like we're bringing ourselves back to a different center, where we're not coming from that level of consciousness where me is the center of that, but we're starting to expand into either that fourth dimensional experience of flow, where we start to realize that, oh, it is not all about me, because you start to have that empathic feeling with other beings and other people around you, and really get a sense of how it feels for them, and really start to have that really embryonic understanding of cause and consequence and why things happen the way they do. Because when you start to actually be able to feel why other people are the way they are and how it feels for them and so on, it starts to give you a sense of why they're acting the way they do. And it's not really quite compassion yet, but it's the beginning of understanding that cause and consequence. You know, and in that fifth dimensional consciousness, you raise your level of consciousness a little bit more, and you practice that holy encounter and bring in more of that second principle as well, and start to really feel that connection with them and be able to see beyond all the phenomena and all the crap, to really acknowledge the oneness within all things. And you really start to feel that and feel it all happening within the oneness of the being, the spiritual being that you are. It brings a whole other perspective again, where, you know, you're much more able from a space like this to be able to make choices that are going to be about the higher love and the long-term harmony, rather than being about defending and pushing and pulling and being right and wrong, which is all about defending little me and making little me the center of it all. Then in that sixth dimensional consciousness, you raise it again, and once again you bring that really that cold light of truth, and cold clear light of truth, and reveal that more of that source reality, and feel that oneness, and are really much more able to have the experience of true compassion, where once again you have a deeper understanding of cause and consequence, because you're bringing in again another level of the third principle of that path to knowing, that expanding into the mind of God. And for that true compassion to happen, there can be no judgment. But when you bring in some more of that, you know, both second and third, but really that sense of oneness with all, and out of that oneness you really know why everyone and everything involved is the way that it is, and how it's all just different elements of the one energy having an interplay together. And that complete absence of judgment, because you completely have that intelligence of why things occur the way they do. You feel it, you know it as an outplay of energy, and it's not right or wrong, it's just life happening, it's just source evolving, it's just, you know, all different aspects of source striving towards greater harmony, towards a greater expression of themselves, you know. And just the way that it plays out in a phenomena on the ground can appear very conflicted and can be challenging on the human level on the ground. But, you know, source is all about evolving and striving towards harmony in some way or another. And the way that plays out on the ground is not always pleasant. But there is no judgment for the place of spirit. It's just an interplay of energy as source strive to reach towards its highest potential. And sometimes the choices that we make here on the ground get in the way of that and make the journey harder and longer, and often more painful because of the resistance of the choices to perceive things from that third dimensional perspective and resisting the true reality of source. And in doing that, source is still going to strive towards higher love and towards harmony and towards evolution. But if we try to shrink that on the ground to a third dimensional reality and resist that process and fight and kick and scream and refuse to see the love, the oneness, the isness, and release the judgment on a situation, we're just going to slow things down, because source, you know, can't force things on the ground to happen. You got to choose it. And then it's just going to take a lot longer. And source, you know, spirit just makes the best of a bad situation in those cases, and anything that happens, even if the situations are very messy, it's all about source striving towards its highest potential. And you choose to either make that more graceful and easier, or to make that harder, but it's still doing the same thing. So from that isness perspective, you really start to get that, and then from as you enter those that isness perspective of the sixth-dimensional consciousness, and then seventh and eighth is just an expanding into that. It gets like into a deeper understanding. When you're in isness, you really start to release the judgment, because you're getting that spiritual perspective of it's just spirit, you know, different aspects of spirit trying to reach certain goals, trying to evolve, trying to grow, trying to learn. And then the more you expand into that, the more you really get that it's just life happening, it's just the process of evolution happening, and there is that complete absence of charge and judgment and agenda and opinions about it. But you make choices in a way that's going to assist source and support source towards that, rather than get in the way of it. Then you're expanding through the universal level of that isness on the planetary level, being that flow universally, and then the expanse of oneness, and then isness on the universal level. And as you go into the co-creator level, then you're really just fully embracing your part in that, and really seeing no separation between you and your individual use of energy and the collective. And you're fully in a place of maturity and taking responsibility for the life wave that you're a part of, or whatever sphere it is that you're expanded into. And, you know, we often see people going, oh, you know, well, the planet's not, you know, super enlightened and stuff, because there's those people over there that are choosing this, and I'm choosing enlightenment, and it's not fair. Well, you know, if you're coming from there, you're obviously not in a co-creator level. You're actually not even in oneness. You might be lucky to be in flow, because you're not actually realizing that you are not separate from the rest of people on this planet. We are all part of the one life wave, and the more you expand through this level of co-creatorship, the more you realize how you can use your energy. So through working with that, always that first principle, but also starting to understand more how things work and how you can use your energy in certain ways, and expanding more and more and more into a sense of that oneness, where not only you feel like part of the collective, but you're starting to feel really one with the individual parts of the collective. So you're the one as one, but you're also the one as the many, and you're also the one with the one source of all. but you also start to really know that I am this person, and I am that person, and I am this person, and you start to really know that you can have more and more of an influence as you grow in wisdom and you grow in the love that you're able to hold, and you're developing a lot of that third principle of expanding into the mind of God, and you get that knowing of how you are a part of the laws of nature, and you can become one with that, and through that you can have an effect on the planet. But it's not something you decide from here. It's got nothing to do with separate self. It's just a knowing. The spirit within you just extend itself in a way that you are going to co-create with all these different aspects of source in the best possible way to try to generate an outcome of love, and that's really the goal. That's really what we're trying to achieve, to come to a place where we know without a doubt in all moments that the way we are, the space we hold, the way we use our energy, and the way we live, and the kind of consciousness that we hold contributes individually as well as collectively to the way things are happening on this planet, and then beyond if you expand your sphere beyond the realm of this planet. And at the same time, you just expand more and more and more and more into the knowledge of being a more aware of yourself and conscious as yourself, as in such unity with the other aspects of source that you start to be the source that is within all. And that's when you start to expand into other levels, and then you can go into the creator levels. So it's a deeper and deeper experience of the oneness, a deeper experience of experiencing source reality and shining that into everything that you do and everything you are and everything you're engaging. Because, if you live as an enlightened soul, you do shine the light of the higher reality that you're coming from into whatever situation that you're involved in. And if you're not doing that, then you're just being a walking ego. And you're just coming from a separate third-dimensional consciousness. And obviously the second principle, that oneness, to be able to more and more and more experiencing yourself as absolutely not separate from the oneness of all, but also start to experience yourself as that one person over there, or I am them, they are me. It's all the universe, it's all the one source, but it's also they are me, like literally. And that's a really real experience. It's not something that's conceptual or theoretical. It's really experienced. And obviously the third principle becomes a huge component in being able to then flow with that dance of the laws of nature and the principles of life in order to fully partake of that co-creator experience, where it's not something theoretical, it's not something you shy from, it's not something you try to understand and make decisions about. It just becomes a natural extension of the spirit that you are, and the source that you are, and the source that they are, and the source that everything is, expressing itself in a way to try and strive to evolve towards its highest potential by making the best possible outcome of the situation down here, and the things that need to be cleared and resolved on the way. And the way that we can contribute to what it's individually or collectively to that can be in lots of ways. If we make choices of fear, we contribute to the collective fear of all. And if we have certain judgment about certain situations, of course, these are the most basic levels. If you judge what's happening over in the Middle East, then obviously you're going to add to the energy of separation and perpetuating the problem. So these are the very basic levels. But to really feel that and not just know it as an intellectual necessity. And, but as you start to really rise your consciousness and experience that sense of connection and oneness and empathy and that true compassion and non-judgment and so on, you can just really feel and know that just the output of energy you're contributing to the collective has an effect on everything, but also the presence you choose to hold. And sometimes the love you choose to hold can actually bring stuff up to the surface. We know that too. When you start to really have an influence in a greater sphere, the influence that you have is not necessarily through contributing fear or contributing love, but also what effect does that fear have, and what effect does that love have. And it becomes one cause, goes into one consequence, into a ramification, and on and on and on. And then by shining a lot of love in one particular, or holding a strong presence of love in one particular place, may actually really bring up a lot of conflict and disharmony. But if it's managed well and you contribute to that situation in the long term in a way that brings it towards harmony, then it can bring more harmony. It's just like in our process. It's just like a bigger scale of our own process. That sometimes when we bring love in certain areas, it triggers a whole bunch of stuff. And then either we just fall into unconsciousness with it and we just let ourselves be overtaken by the fear, or we stay steady in our source knowing and hold the truth strong and keep clearing through and manage it in a way that's actually going to produce more harmony and more enlightenment. Does that make sense? Nige?
The quality of mercy, does that have a part or a piece?
Yeah, mercy.
Dimension?
Yeah, mercy really kicks in at quite a high level because mercy is a much, much higher vibration of compassion. It really has to do with coming from a place of universal consciousness, and it's the way that the universal consciousness perceives justice to be. So it's the way that it dispenses justice, and it's so beyond the level of understanding that the little human can understand, that it's just you really have to come from that place of complete non-judgment, complete oneness, completely, in that co-creator and even creator resource in order to be able to dispense that sense of mercy, which is about rectifying certain aspects of creation or reorienting certain aspects of source to serve the overall evolution. But the criteria that comes into this is just something that needs to be perceived from a much higher level of consciousness.
Thanks. Interesting question.
So what I'd like to do is get a bit of a sense of, just have a bit of an experience, a bit of a process where we get to really feel into that and go into the co-creator level to just get a feel for what we're aiming for here. We all say, I want to train to become a master, I want to train to be a leader. Well, that's the kind of consciousness you have to aim for, and you have to practice to reach and then try to hold as much as possible. And it's a progressive thing, but all of you drop out of flow, oneness or isness when, depending what level you're at in moments, because you get triggered and you let yourself just lose your enlightenment and behave like complete egos. And various ones at the retreat have been struggling with that, in different moments. And so when it's the case, it's like, come back to alignment, come back to center, but also just remember to not be so weak-willed and just bring the light of enlightenment into that and start to really enlighten your own consciousness, re-enlighten your own consciousness, because you just let yourself just drop in consciousness straight away. So when you start to have a lot of stuff come up and you could easily get caught up in it, or you're struggling a bit with it, obviously you have to run Cosmosis, which starts with align, center, allow, feel, etc., acknowledge, all of that. But where you run the process from, what perspective are you running the process from, is also another way of saying, where are you aligning and centering yourself? Because often for new students when they start and they're still very much caught up in being identified as a separate ego, when they first start to learn the process, they often align and center to some degree into their ego or into their personality, who they think they really are, which is not necessarily who they really are as spiritual beings, but for where they're at, that's progress. And they start to clear that. And then as you grow, you start to experience a deeper experience of that alignment and center. And alignment is about what you're connected into, but what you're about and where you're going in terms of your consciousness, in terms of your evolution, in terms of what you value and what you prioritize. And that's what being aligned is. It's about, you remember what you're about, you remember where you're going with this. And we've done different processes in this retreat that all relate to that, such as remembering the I am identification, and also remembering what is the true purpose of being here, experiencing this human life and growing and making the most of the opportunity. And so when you align and center, that's also where you bring in more of that will aspect, because aligning and centering, it's very important as part of doing that to bring a certain amount of that correct use of will and to really reinforce that identification with source, that aligning yourself to source reality rather than be caught up in the egoic reality that those feelings will tend to bring up. And then the more you grow in the process and the more you apply that, bring in that strong correct use of will to align and center yourself in a greater, more expanded perspective, which is that higher level of consciousness, where you approach whatever feelings are coming up for you from the perspective of oneness or isness or even the co-creator thing. So it's all about where you align and center in. So to some degree, that process that we're talking about today with the various level of consciousness and how you need to really use that divine will and that process of enlightenment to allow yourself to perceive things from that more enlightened level of consciousness. But it's, and to some degree, depending where you're at, you'll bring a bit more of that second principle to really expand into more of the oneness, to be able to have that sense of oneness with whatever's coming up for you, or that isness, so that you really, you get it, you see it all from that spiritual perspective, and you have complete empathy and understanding for yourself. You feel at one with all of, I am all that I am, the amazing enlightened perspective, as well as all these gritty bits that are coming up. And you know that that's all one, and there is no judgment coming from that isness perspective. So it's just, it just is something else. That's some other part of creation that's striving towards the expression of its highest potential by trying to be transmuted into a less frozen state. It's coming from that frozen state of fear, trying to be transmuted into love. So whenever something comes up for you like that, it's instead of getting caught up in the conflict of it and judging it and so on, just align and center yourself and will yourself as you surrender also to more love and to more of that sense of intelligence, of understanding as one with the mind of God why things are the way they are. Just that sense of really holding a space of that for whatever feelings come up for you. And then you'll be able to clear it much faster rather than let yourself get pulled down by this and shrink your consciousness and then battle with it because it's all about me, or you have judgment on it, or you see it as separate, or all these things. So it's part of your alignment and centering process, really. It's like you bring yourself back to who you really are, spirit self, the I am, and you bring yourself back to that high level of consciousness, and then you approach your feeling experience and your healing and clearing experience from that higher level of consciousness. And that's the thing, you don't have to be perfect or have no baggage or cleared all your fear to be able to tune into this high level of consciousness. And a lot of you could hold a much higher level of consciousness that you do in most moments, except on a good day, because you just forget and let yourself get pulled down by other aspects of your energy that come from have been judged and pushed away, avoided and denied and frozen in a third dimensional context. And so you have to raise that so that it's able to come back into oneness and come back into complete acceptance and have that true compassion for yourself. And just understand, take responsibility. Just know absolutely why that energy is the way that it is and how you contributed to that and how all of life that you've interacted with in this life or for lifetimes has contributed to this energy being like this. Without any judgment, without any conflict, you really get it, you really see it, you feel it, you know it, you're at one with it, and you just contribute your energy right here, right now in the way that's going to move that energy towards more love and more harmony. So it's that taking responsibility. Because that's how it is. We are not islands. We are not separate. We all little bits of vegetables in the soup, but we forget that, It's like the potatoes carrying on like, go away, you carrot, you're not like me, I hate you. And, it's not going to make a very nice soup if we do it like this, but in the end, the soup's still happening. But it's going to taste a bit foul if all the ingredients fight each other instead of just taking responsibility for their contribution to the whole. So let's just really feel. Let's take the example of feeling into some of the situations on the planet, and let's take the example of the situation in the Middle East, particularly with Iran and Israel, Palestine, kind of the whole area is kind of a bit. So you may pick one particular area more than the other. It's up to you, really. And let's really from that third dimensional consciousness, it's kind of like, these idiots over there fighting, aren't they stupid? And geez, I hope they don't, start a nuclear war, because that might not be for my house, and I don't want bloody nuclear debris in my backyard, and it's all about me, and the judgment of what's over there, and it's all about, how is that going to affect little me? So if we start raising it to that fourth dimensional consciousness of flow, and we bring that empathic component in these early stages of understanding why things happen the way they do, and this beginning of that experience of timelessness into it. We start to feel different about the situation if we feel into that. We start to maybe, feel a bit more empathy for the people involved in that conflict. People that see the kids killed or have their house destroyed. Maybe we start to get a bit more empathy for one country trying to defend its own interest against the other, and so on. But, we still have a certain amount of judgment, and we still, they're separate. There's these people over there, but I'm starting to feel for them. What's happening over there? But I get, with the history and what's happening, and the cultural elements and the political elements, and I'm starting, I can kind of start to understand why it's happening as well. Getting a sense of it. Then going to the fifth dimensional consciousness, that oneness. We start to actually feel a lot more of a connection with what's going on over there and all the people over there. We start to feel like it's actually, it's part of us. And we can feel what they're feeling, but it's a much deeper level of empathy, because it's not just like, I can feel what you're feeling. It's like, whoa. I can feel it almost inside me, because I can feel that oneness between us. I can feel the collective experience of all these people over there, and I can feel sometimes some more individual experiences in there. And, it can bring up some feelings on the human level, where the human struggles with that, because the human has trouble accepting that such conflict can happen, and wants to make it feel better, and wants to help in that way. And yet there starts to be that more spiritual perspective in there, that it's all about love, and certain things happen because they need to happen, and there's a sense of, how can I just hold the presence of love there, for instance, or harmony? How can I love these people as they go through that? So there can be a bit of a dual experience there of, as you feel what's going on for everyone there, and that overall situation, and it's kind of like you feel it in yourself, you feel as part of yourself. The human being just wants to, oh God, these poor people, where do I donate something? And yet the spirit within you just starts to perceive it in a different way, with more acceptance and less conflict about it. Then when we expand and raise the vibration into that six-dimensional consciousness of isness, much less of that human component and human conflict about it. Because really we have that complete absence of judgment. It's just cause and consequence. Much deeper sense of that cause and consequences. The mind doesn't necessarily understand, like, oh yeah, A plus B happened, that led to C, and that's what this is happening. It's not like that. You just get a sense of the flow of all the ingredients that combined into this situation, and you still feel what's going on there, that sense of oneness. There's a, from the human perspective, might seem a bit cold or disinterested, but it's just not personally invested. It's just about perceiving the source within all of these people and all of these countries, and that collective pool of source bits playing out something, and you just get that sense, you just feel in your heart, you just get that sense of how you can contribute in order to provide, to produce more of an outcome of love and harmony. Just take a little while to stay with that and feel into that. Keep raising. Some of you keep dropping back in that fifth dimensional experience. Remember, just let go of the judgment. Just allow yourself to bring in some more of that will aspect, correct use of will. Bring in enlightenment to your perspective. And a bit more of that third ray. Intelligence, understanding why things occur the way they do according to divine law and the principles of life, the mechanics of it, but in a really deeper experience that you get in the flow version. Oh yeah, it makes perfect sense. Yep. Starting having that experience of compassion. There is no judgment. For anyone or anything involved, it's not like one's right or one's wrong, or some people are better than others in the end. It's all just, all of them striving, the source within them striving to evolve, to resolve conflict, to harmonize, to grow. And that plays out in funky ways on the ground, that's all. And you get that sense of how you need to be and the kind of presence you need to hold and what you need to do to your energy to contribute for love and harmony in that, with no judgment whatsoever, no agenda. That means that you have no judgment on the experience of suffering either. Necessary suffering. You need to experience it and feel it and go through it in order to clear whatever that wave of suffering that's been backlogged. That happens on a collective level too. Countries, nations need to work through that backlog of suffering in order to grow and harmonize. So we're going into a deeper and deeper experience of that flow, oneness and easiness on the universal level. Allow yourself to just keep growing and expanding your consciousness that way, rising the vibration, more enlightenment, more oneness with Source, more unity, experience of unity, and more sense of functioning as one with the mind of God, the principles of life, feeling it all, knowing it all, that true compassion, and a deeper and deeper experience of it. And as we move into the co-creator levels, we start to really feel how our energy is part of that mix, part of that soup. And how over the last year, 2 years, 10 lifetimes, how we've been lately, in some way or another, has contributed as part of the ingredients into that soup. Individually. And you don't have to think about it, you just feel it, you know it. And then collectively too. There is no separation between us and them. That situation is happening within us collectively. And we've contributed to that, individually as individual sparks of source, and collectively as all of us together. Get a feel for that. Allow yourself to go with that experience, to surrender to that experience, that reality. And even though you may feel the pain present there, you don't judge it. There is no sense of, oh, it's terrible. It's not like that. It's just like, oh, wow, this is what's going on over there. You're still feeling, but it's not right or wrong, and you're really just getting the oneness. There is no separation, how you are responsible for all of that, as much as anyone else. Or almost. And you get a sense in your knowing. Once again, it's just the energy within you knows, the energy that you are knows how you can co-create the source that I am as one with all these different aspects of source. All of us can co-create together to bring more harmony to that situation. It's not about forcing anyway, it's not about an agenda, because there is no judgment. You know, it's not like what's happening is bad or anything or needs to be fixed quickly. It's just about how can that aspect of evolution be encouraged towards highest potential, in harmony with divine plan and purpose, in, of, and full of, and service to all that is. It's got nothing to do with me or what I think or what people think. Or it's just about in alignment with divine plan and purpose, in, of, and full of, and service to all that is. No urgency, no opinions. As you allow yourself to deepen in that experience of the co-creator, more and more you get a sense of how you are, everyone involved and everyone else on the planet. Not only can you individually use your energy differently, but you can actually create movements on a collective level, use channels. Because all of these people are you, and you are them, as spirit. And you're not pushing anything on anyone. It's just about opening opportunities, potentials, and then everyone involved can make their own free will choices. Every aspect of source can choose for themselves. It's that weird dichotomy. So aligned and centered in that, getting a really clear sense of this experience of higher consciousness, and knowing that that's what we're aiming to have in all moments. Obviously, we've got to clear our judgment, we've got to clear our fears and attachments and small me attachments and perspectives. But we can access this, and we've got to practice it, and we use that divine will, also with a blend of that spiritual intelligence, path to knowing, and that path to oneness with Source, to assist ourselves to keep enlightening ourselves and coming from a high level of consciousness, whatever it is that we deal with in our own individual lives or as part of life form on this planet. Really grounded with that, maintaining as much of that as possible, staying in that expanded state. Remembering that this is the source reality that you're aiming for. At least, if you want to go any further, please feel free. This is what you got to aim for. Fake it till you make it as much as possible. And clear whatever keeps getting yourself to lose consciousness and not behave as an enlightened soul when stuff gets triggered. Remember this. Remember how it feels. Be grounded, be real, be here.